The area was practically deserted. Therefore, an uneasy feeling spread briefly as she stepped out of the bus, into strange darkness. Directly, she saw Leon with his friends waiting at some parking spaces, and calmed down. Almost too much, considering she just met him today. Only, meeting him seemed the most real thing that had happened since her arrival. She became increasingly reassured when she saw that there was a girl in the group.
Welcome to Cirque de la Lune. A freak show with no acrobatics except words.
Leon greeted her, and bowed with a waving hand like a ringmaster. It was the young woman who replied with a laugh.
He thought longer about that line.
She stepped forward. Kleio thought to shake her hand. Instead, she gave her a hug.
Maya, so nice to have another girl around for once,
she exclaimed exuberantly, underneath all the makeup that gave her an almost doll-like look. There had to be a pretty thing, but Kleio would surely have frozen her butt off in her airy get-up.
Kleio, thank you so much for taking me.
Maybe all that makeup protected her from the adverse temperatures, or she was more robust by nature. That also was a possibility.
Plenty of women where we're going,
one of the guys confidently remarked. He came forward. Kleio already thought to hug her like Maya, but he held out his hand with the respectful German distance she was used to.
Felix, delighted.
Kleio,
I've already had the pleasure of getting to know yours,
he replied directly, looking at his mate.
Leon has mentioned it once or twice.
The emphasis suggested that it had hardly remained at so few mentions, and Felix looked little like Kleio imagined a Felix to look like. She did not want to commit to an origin, but guessed Turkish or Arab roots. Despite his distinctive facial features, she found him handsome. He had a certain head of character. The fourth member of their merry band stood apathetically secluded, leaning against a parked car, not seeming to be exactly where he stood. As he stood there, he seemed almost like the Teutonic version of a laughing Buddha, with flushed cheeks and somewhat rumpled, as if he were gradually fading in his exhaustion. Leon stood in front of him and looked at him reproachfully, waving his hand in front of his face before snapping his fingers repeatedly.
Gustav, wake up. She's here. So we can go. Pull yourself together for a moment and introduce yourself properly, like your mommy taught you, and then move your fat ass.
Kleio didn't think his speech was nearly as cool as he felt it was, stifling herself the comment, not knowing their history.
Hot woman at 9 o'clock,
shouted Felix, and only then did Gustav seemingly regain consciousness, looked at 9 o'clock, where Kleio was standing. Embarrassed, she turned around, only to gain certainty that no one else was lying on that course.
Sorry. I must have dozed off. That's what happens when you keep me waiting so long. Can you French never be on time?
She could only apologize. When she saw how Maya grinned at her, she understood better why she was happy to have female company. There was no one else wandering around but them. The further their group went east, the more this abandonment took shape. Where in the days of the GDR, the socialists wanted to provide their comrades with some amenities, now lay a neglected piece of USSR history. The silenced echo of Marx's ideology showed how violently it had been run down. Mother Russia could no longer stand up to the greening. Only Father Frost. Barren forests and concrete buildings covered with browned creepers dominated the landscape, more resistant than a revolution. A dystopian no-man's land seemed to wait behind the barrier. Between them stood a fence barely 3 meters high. For anyone with a minimum level of fitness and sobriety, it was hardly an obstacle. You didn't have to be a free runner to play urban explorer here. Kleio listened for music, and only heard the crackling of their footsteps. She briefly wondered whether a party with loud music could actually be taking place, of which nothing was heard here yet. Like the gentleman he mimed in front of her, Leon offered to help her climb the fence. Elegantly, Felix had been the first to swing over it and was now helping Maya. Kleio thought they should have rather taken care of Gustav. Getting to this point caused him trouble. Daringly, he tried to pull himself up on the fence, and everyone but him realized how much he failed. Leon was still preoccupied with Kleio, and she had to point her finger at him before it occurred to him to help his buddy conquer the fence. She took the opportunity and climbed the obstacle to the other side by her own effort. While Leon and Felix stood by Gustav, she escaped a curious look under her skirt. She had observed how Felix took a sneak peek when he obligingly gave Maya a hand. At least he had also promised himself one with her. An astonished, slightly disappointed expression gave him away.
Isn't there anyone here to look after things?
She wanted to know from them.
Just two old farts on weekends,
Leon replied.
Heard they get paid well for keeping their mouths shut.
Shouldn't we be hearing music in here by now if all this is really going on?
No need to worry,
Said Felix.
I got a message beforehand. It's business as usual. We also don't want to sacrifice you to our blood god or anything.
I didn't mean it that way.
Replied Kleio, although his words did little to counteract her current paranoia.
I wouldn't have gotten involved with such characters at all.
Interjected Maya, laughing.
She has some guts.
I think I'm going to puke.
Gustav commented. Not so much their conversation as his condition.
Dude, now pull yourself together.
Came annoyed from Leon, but Gustav thought nothing of it and vomited abruptly.
What's wrong with him? Too much to drink already?
Kleio asked Leon as discreetly as possible.
If it were only that. He'd actually need a trip sitter.
His friend's behavior seemed embarrassing to him, but he mustered understanding.
Poor guy works himself to death through the week. No wonder he's always getting wasted on the weekends. He's actually a fine fellow, and usually the one of us who talks the most.
Kleio felt himself practically apologizing for the behavior.
It would never occur to me to judge him after something like that.
She said sincerely.
If that's what he needs, and he's otherwise functioning, I don't see a problem with it. Even then, it would be his.
Leon smiled gratefully for this attitude. Kleio stepped closer to Gustav.
Everything all right with you? Can you go on? Or should we stay here for a bit?
She inquired. He lifted his face, looking with narrowed eyes.
Are you an angel?
The question gave way to an uncomfortable silence, and before Kleio could answer in the negative, Gustav came to his feet with surprising energy.
I'm just messing with you guys. I feel much better.
He stretched.
Does anyone have a mint drop, perhaps?
Maya dug one out of her purse and handed him the overdue refreshment for his sour breath. The walk across the disused area made Kleio aware of how immense the park must have been. They reached a stone plaza in front of a wide and undoubtedly dilapidated concrete building. What function this once served in the days of the amusement park would remain a mystery. No one of her newfound friends knew the answer. Thus, it could have become everything Kleio imagined. The building hardly seemed like an attraction to her. For that, it appeared too much like an office complex. The assumption was therefore not entirely unjustified that members of the Stasi once operated from the heart of an amusement park and close to the wall. Dozens of people bustled around the square, standing in groups surrounded by the sound of loud conversations, as if trying to drown each other out in a contest of the most penetrating voices. Only before that, music was also heard. Kleio could hardly claim that it particularly appealed to her. To monotonous rhythms and melodies, one could easily dance, which was essentially what she expected from tonight. Two bouncers stood at the entrance like statues made flesh, and in a bad mood. From their intimidating presence, Kleio classified them as part of a Hell's Angels-style biker gang. After a scrutinizing look at the arrivals, they were granted entry. Gustav stayed in the background with his head bowed down. His condition may have improved for the moment, but he was far from what could pass for sober. They were spared complications for the moment, and the group of 5 entered the building. Inside, Kleio was overwhelmed by so much organizational talent. The Germans were ultimately masters at it, no matter what kind. Whether conservative or liberal, whether law-abiding or unlawful, they had swept up all the dirt that would otherwise have been lying around, similar to the outside, and upgraded the huge interior to a club. Only a few little plants that sprouted from cracks in the floor had been left standing. The greenery gave the location a post-apocalyptic flair. A system with proper subwoofers provided a full sound, which emanated from the DJ booth at the end of the room. Wooden pallets and cushions had been used to improvise seating around the edges, and a similarly recycled construction formed the bar opposite, where 3 people catered to an enormous crowd. At illegal events like these, admission was rarely charged. Drinks were considerably cheaper, which Kleio saw as an advantage for herself. Also that she was by no means the only one to enjoy these privileges. An estimated 200 to 300 people, consisting mainly of young folks, danced exuberantly in an ecstatic homage to the DJ, crammed between the shrine behind which he was DJing, benches and bar. Their group made it to one spot and no further, and was now sandwiched between the bar and the dancing mob. Leon counted how many they were. Kleio was just about to yell out to him what she would like to drink and hand him the money when he was already going off on his own.
He said he'd get some for all of us.
She heard Maya half shout, and she limited her communication to a nod. Shortly after, Leon hauled in 5 white cans. A pared down yet squiggly print gave it a dashing look.
What kind of swill is this?
She asked, surprised to be understood.
Hard seltzer,
Replied Leon, handing her one.
I thought you might be into something like that.
Mineral water with alcohol.
She replied, reading the ingredients.
Vegan, gluten-free, low-calorie. Don't you get socially ostracized if you admit you don't like it?
He waited for her to take a sip.
So, how does it taste?
Doesn't taste like much, but what I taste I like.
She summarized. Drinking water with alcohol seemed fine to her, as long as you didn't drink alcohol like water. Their position lent itself poorly to relaxed conversation. Kleio soon suggested,
Shall we dance?
and didn't have to ask Maya twice. From the looks of it, she had only been waiting for this suggestion from someone else's mouth. The boys succumbed to feminist peer pressure, as well as an irrational protective instinct, and complied as smoothly as possible. It didn't take long. 1 or 2 beat drops, and the girls were increasingly encircled by external predators. It may have been makeshift disguised as dance, but the hunt was on. Open season, as they used to say. The sharks were hungry. Kleio and Gustav glanced at each other, both seeming to notice the same thing.
Getting crowded in here.
He shouted, coming extra close to her ear, which at his volume was too well meant. Now he seemed really loose in his frenzy, but Kleio was thinking about how she could make him understand that another mint drop would have been appropriate, without shouting it around. Suddenly it came over her like a thunderstorm, the chatter of people, as if they had all begun to talk to each other. Louder and louder grew their voices, until she almost could not distinguish between them, confused that she barely understood the exact words, just like the incident in the cinema, a piercing murmur. She understood individual words from it, and the majority of them were insinuating, strange, nonsensical, or downright disturbing. In the middle of the dance, she became dizzy and dropped the half-empty can of hard seltzer. She held on to Maya so she wouldn't fall.
Did somebody mix something in my drink?
She wanted to know.
Are you okay?
Maya inquired. And Kleio couldn't tell. All of a sudden, nothing seemed okay to her.
Why do they all have to talk so loudly?
She left it unsaid. The chatter went into a climax, while the lips of none of them moved.
I need to get some fresh air.
She replied.
I'll come with you.
Came immediately from Maya. Her male companions joined in. They had landed on the dance floor in the first place because of them. Only Felix seemed to have just gotten into the groove and expressed disappointment. She wouldn't have minded going out alone, was primarily thinking about refreshment, whether someone would actually give her something she had not been allowed to prepare for beforehand. She made her way through the crowd, past the biker bouncers, and out onto the square. She walked until the noise stopped hitting her eardrums so badly, put her hands on her hips and puffed away. As she did so, she had to look like someone who had just run a marathon in evening attire. Her gaze fell on a group of people not far in front of her. Although the people were standing together, everyone was holding their smartphone in hand and was either recording the event in some form or indulging in other memories. Instead of dwelling in the ones they were making, they stared down at their screens, each to himself. Automatically, Kleio turned to the sky, preferring to look up at the stars. The low-light pollution of the park offered a magnificent view of the firmament. A sadness came over her that she could not explain. It was a pity how we forgot to live in the now, even though it was all we had. How we tried to capture every moment of the present for posterity without ever really experiencing one. Our gaze went forward and backward while we failed to look where we were standing. Kleio saw the truth clearly in front of her before the clarity blurred before her eyes. She tilted her gaze, and what was revealed to her was impossible. Instead of holding their smartphones and standing in places like before, she saw the group chained. Not in iron or other metals, their shackles seemed to be made of an organic substance. Not of flesh or plants, more like a compact, almost liquid smoke or vibrating, pulsating ice. Their shadows were projected onto the wall by the light emanating from it. They stood directly in front of it, staring spellbound at the shadow play in their hands that they were themselves, each wrapped in a transparent cocoon that they carried around with them.
Are you feeling better, darling?
Maya wanted to know and beat Leon to it. Certainly he would have left out darling. The group approached the troubled child apprehensively. Kleio looked at them, then again to the group with the smartphones. They stood there again as before, absorbed by their virtual bubble. Something in their physical appearance had changed. Kleio's episode went to the next level when a psychedelic light show emanated from the people. In a way, she had always imagined auras, only more like a cloud and less geometric. Jagged, cornered, with curves and perfect angles, shapes vibrated from them as from a polygonal torch, while from their bellies rose a multicolored glowing substance. Above, it spilled out in jellyfish-like spires that curled above them in the weightlessness. A living crown. Each seemed to be connected beyond that by a tube or cable, a whole-body umbilical cord to each other. A transparent membrane surrounded them and connected all with heaven and earth. From this, Maya's question could hardly be answered in the affirmative.
I think there's something wrong with me.
She replied, wishing she could have been drugged in comparison to what she inwardly feared. Maya went with Felix to get a cup of water for her, while Kleio gathered herself away from the commotion. She described the visit to the cinema to them, what had happened there and the other oddities. She excluded the dream about the bank robbers because she was not ready to believe that she had been shot. That part was unreasonable even for her. Her new friends, in turn, reacted to the aspect of her story that she never saw coming in this form.
What movie?
Asked Leon, confused. None of them had ever heard of it. Kleio felt nausea rising, even before they had searched the net for this film, and had found no single post. The same with this genius in the director's chair, Eilif Olsen. Anyone with a little sensitivity had to realize that it was an act of rape on her mind. Neither the film nor its director found a mention, were non-existent.
Now I actually feel like I'm in the wrong movie.
Kleio admitted understatedly, by which she resigned in equal measure.
You're talking about some kind of Mandela effect.
Felix interpreted the phenomenon.
Mandela?
Asked Gustav.
Yes, after Nelson Mandela.
Ah, the one who died in prison in the 90s?
Just not.
Nagged Maya know-it-all.
It's all right, Maya. Calm down.
Gustav ran his hands downward, as if that would placate her.
I'm just kidding. Everyone's heard of the Mandela effect by now.
He pointed his finger at Kleio.
What she's describing sounds a little nastier.
By his previous standards, he seemed downright sober. He was the kind of party animal who, in the grossest of intoxication, could seem periodically clean.
Have you guys ever seen Shazam with the genie? We used to have a cassette of it at home.
Shut the fuck up, Gustav.
Leon admonished him.
We don't have to make fun of it.
Kleio stared at the floor, would have found it funny herself had she not been affected by the issue. Like Leon's friends, she doubted her sanity, didn't even need to see the gesture Felix was making to Leon. It illustrated what he thought her state of mind was. He squinted his eyes inward while circling his own temple with his fingertip. Unexpectedly, it was Gustav who threw up.
Fantastic.
Felix commented.
We really have a stylish community together tonight.
He obviously included Kleio in the sarcastic remark. Leon once again mutated into a protector without her asking him to.
We all know you like to hear yourself talk, Felix. But do you have to keep coming in one's ear all the time?
They seemed to enjoy discussing among themselves, and Kleio got little of the argument that broke out between them. She briefly observed Gustav. He had fallen from his temporary high back into a low, and had to hold on to the ground to keep the trip from carrying him away. Apparently, she was better at dealing with changes of consciousness, which did not mean that it went unnoticed. For the fact that she largely abstained from drugs, her perception was quite jolted. Maya, meanwhile, had become involved in the discussion between the squabblers, and her problem child was completely elsewhere with the thoughts. She turned her gaze back to the stars, to the moon, and guessed what was behind it. In an abstract thought construct, which fleetingly came to mind and immediately fell away, because it surpassed human perception. From this impulse, so it seemed, the stars moved. The next impossibility arose from their constellations. First, it appeared like a meteorite. Burning it rained down on the horizon. A shooting star headed toward them, until the outline suddenly became visible. A woman with long white hair stood on the back of a bizarre creature. Her conveyance, however, had no wings, was not a bit aerodynamic. She rode it more like Baron Munchausen a cannonball.
What is that?
Cried Gustav fervently, pointing exactly where the projectile was approaching from. No one but him and Kleio noticed the apparition. She wanted to agree with him, but astonishment held her diaphragm captive. Unbraked, the creature struck the square, breaking a swath into the ground, and a cloud of dust spread from the impact. Panic-stricken, Gustav previously stood up and ran away, while Kleio watched the goings-on as if rooted to the spot. Maya, Leon, and Felix turned their attention to the other problem child and hurried after him. He did not go far and stared again, spellbound. As the dirt of the impact settled and revealed the woman that his friends did not see, they assumed that the drugs were affecting him, probably a cocktail of different active ingredients. It also escaped their notice that Kleio saw the very same figure that leapt elegantly from the dead monster, otherwise invisible to everyone, as was the destruction left by her appearance, her beauty, otherworldly. Even though she possessed the flawless face of a young woman, her long hair was silvery white, while the radiance of centuries, if not millennia, escaped her. She wore a long and equally clinging dress of purple silk and silver jewelry. Immediately she grabbed the beast by the throat on which she had ridden, threw the lifeless carcass away like a garbage bag, and it disappeared into nothingness. Kleio heard Gustav clamoring in the background.
Don't you see that woman? She came out of the sky with that monster and just made it disappear.
Stop that crazy talk, Gustav,
demanded Leon, casting an uncertain glance at the people in the immediate vicinity, some of whom were already turning their attention to the unfortunate psychonaut.
They'll send us away soon if you don't get your act together.
The woman!
Gustav ignored the unwanted spotlight.
Don't you see her?
Kleio was the only person present who perceived the woman as well. The latter strode toward her, making an annoyed face.
How did you do that?
She asked angrily.
Did? I didn't do anything.
Kleio replied cluelessly. The woman examined her from top to down.
Something has clearly gone wrong with you. What happened to you? You're not supposed to see me at all.
I have no idea what you're talking about, or what's going on. Someone must have spiked my drink.
No, impossible. No one here can mix such a drink.
She explained mysteriously, as if that would put that theory off the table.
That's not good at all.
she continued.
What's not good?
You shouldn't be here. Not this version of you.
Can you be a little clearer? I don't understand a word.
Kleio faltered, distraught.
You've been damaged. It's a miracle I can even talk to you like this, in any way.
She made it less understandable.
I'll be right back.
The woman spoke then,
Try to stay here.
before she abruptly disappeared from the face of the earth.
Did you see?
Shouted Gustav.
She was swallowed by space.
He seemed to be losing his mind. The dire consequences of the drugs were beyond question for his friends. Only Kleio knew better. She had not merely witnessed the incident without knowingly ingesting anything. She had been talking to Gustav's hallucination. Suddenly, she stood up and went to a neighboring group that was sharing the alcohol they had brought with them.
Can I buy a big cup of the gin from you?
She asked, and one was freely filled. She aimed once and emptied the cup in one go, garnering compliments in return. All the while, she just thought it would help somehow. Didn't people drink to solve problems or to dissolve them inside it? It didn't work. She repeated the act, another, and in her case it led to the opposite effect. To an entirely different approach to problem solving than she had in mind. Lightning flickered through the sky, nervously and at rapid speed. Not at all like in a normal thunderstorm, but rather as if the sky was suffering an epileptic seizure. Fan flashes of violet, green and blue color spectra covered the entire horizon. A rainbow glittering fine dust covered the ground like fog, and cracks appeared in the rock. Hot gases and boiling steam emerged from them. A biblical Armageddon on LSD. Only now did those present realize this was the end, and their screams filled the night. That of the whole world. In the midst of the panic, Kleio was the only one who appeared unmoved, almost lethargic, outwardly, inwardly. She was losing her mind. It was not that she woke up when the world was ending. The world was ending because she woke up.